Good afternoon, and welcome to the Dahlgren Chapel of the Sacred Heart, the spiritual heart of our university community. My name is Father Mark Bosco, Vice President for Mission and Ministry, and I wish to thank you for joining us for our Spring 2024 Sacred Lecture. Today we're honored to have with us Father Stephen Sundborg of the Society of Jesus, who serves as Special Assistant to the President here at Georgetown. The Dahlgren Sacred Lecture Series was inaugurated in 2014 to continue a Jesuit tradition practiced by Ignatius of Loyola and his early companions. Jesuits would often offer lectures outside the context of worship, with the intent to inform and edify those seeking to grow in faith, hope, and love. Their sacred lectures dealt with Scripture, but also engaged with issues of the moral life, prayer, the person of Christ, and the challenges that one encounters in living out the gospel in everyday life. Meant to be accessible to a wider audience, these lectures were a staple of Jesuit pastoral practice in both their schools and in their churches. And so in that same spirit, we have adapted this tradition to our current moment, seeking out distinguished speakers engaged with topics related to spirituality, social justice, and the Jesuit intellectual and artistic tradition. A list of our past lectures are archived on the website and are also listed in your program today. It's my pleasure then to invite Dr. John J. DeGioia, President of Georgetown, to officially introduce Father Steve and the topic of the lecture.
Thanks, Mark. Good job. Thank you very much, Mark. Good afternoon, everyone. It's a pleasure to be with all of you as we come together for our Spring 2024 Dahlgren Chapel Sacred Lecture, and thank you all for joining us for this special occasion. And I especially wish to thank our colleagues in our Office of Mission and Ministry for facilitating this special lecture since its inception 10 years ago, and to Father Mark Bosco, our Vice President for Mission and Ministry, for his leadership. So we're deeply grateful for this opportunity to welcome Father Stephen Sundborg, President Emeritus of Seattle University, to offer his reflections on the topic Spiritualities in Dialogue, Ignatius of Loyola, Ruth Burrows, and ourselves. And Steve, thank you for sharing this time with us. We look forward to your reflections in just a few moments. Father Sundborg has been deeply committed to the Jesuit intellectual and spiritual tradition and its resonance in our world. After earning his doctorate from the Pontifical Gregorian University in Rome in 1982, he joined Seattle University's Department of Theology and Religious Studies, and after 8 years there, including 4 as the rector of the Seattle University Jesuit community, he was appointed provincial of the Oregon province of the Society of Jesus. In each of these roles, he left an extraordinary legacy of care and excellence. In 1997, he was selected to serve as Seattle University's 21st president, where he enabled Seattle to grow in many ways, found new opportunities to strengthen its Jesuit identity. He strengthened Seattle's tradition of excellence through a deeper engagement with faculty research and academic initiatives, creating endowed chairs and professorships, significantly expanding the footprint of the university's campus to better nurture and sustain these efforts. Over his 24-year tenure, the longest in the institution's history, his commitment to inclusive excellence led to the creation of more than 100 endowed scholarships and an increase in enrollment by nearly 80%. His leadership enabled Seattle to grow from a regional to a national university, to transition from a Division III to a Division I school, that's in the world of intercollegiate athletics, to graduate more than 50,000 young people over this period and consistently place among the top 10 universities in the West across several different rankings. During his tenure, Father Sundborg led Seattle to engage more deeply with the local community through the launch of the Center for Community Engagement and its Seattle University Youth Initiative, which works to strengthen educational resources for students and their families. He served in a number of leadership roles for a number of organizations, including the United Way of King County, the YMCA of Greater Seattle, the City of Seattle Governing Council of the Committee to End Homelessness, and the Fulcrum Foundation. We've been fortunate to have Father Sundborg's leadership on our board of directors. He served from 2012 to 2018. and I've been deeply grateful for nearly a quarter century of friendship. He's also advanced the mission of Jesuit higher education through his services on the boards of Loyola Marymount University, the University of San Francisco, the Association of American Colleges and Universities, the Association of Jesuit Colleges and Universities. After stepping down from the Seattle University presidency in 2021, Father Sundborg joined our Georgetown community, focusing on helping us strengthen our Catholic and Jesuit identity with Dr. Jean Lord as a senior advisor on Catholic identity, and in collaboration with Father Mark Bosco, he co-chairs our committee leading our Mission Priority Examine, a self-study and peer review process for Catholic and Jesuit universities. Our previous engagement in this process was in 2017. This was our second MPE, and we're grateful to Father Sundborg for his guidance as we pursue a deeper alignment with our Catholic and Jesuit values. As we continue to grow our presence here in Washington, D.C., specifically the emergence of our Capitol campus, Steve is deeply involved with a new project to engage our downtown East neighbors as we seek to deepen the contributions we as a university can make in our city. So Steve, thank you for your leadership, for your contributions to our Catholic and Jesuit mission. We could not be more honored than to hear you speak about St. Ignatius and Ruth Burrows and ourselves in dialogue with one another. Please join me in welcoming Father Stephen Sundborg.
Thank you very much, Jack. It's great to be able to be working with you for the Jesuit purposes of Georgetown University. And Mark, thank you very much for inviting me to give this sacred lecture, Dahlgren Sacred Lecture. The theological discipline of spirituality is relatively new, having taken over in the last 50 years from ascetical and mystical theology. As a discipline, spirituality is simply the study of religious experience. When I began my spirituality doctoral studies in 1976, there were very few places in the world where I could have studied. I went to the Institute of Spirituality at the Pontifical Gregorian University in Rome, primarily to be able to study under the Jesuit psychiatrist Federico Arvesu. My focus remained on first-hand accounts of personal religious experience, essentially spiritual autobiographies. I was being trained to work in the formation of younger Jesuits, but I never got the opportunity to do so, as I was soon enough snatched up into administration and leadership. However, spiritual autobiographies, religious experience, as it were, on the pulse, has remained my passionate interest. The sacred lecture at Georgetown University is one of the few occasions I have ever had to speak about this passion, to talk about what I'm really interested in, and to do so in as experiential a manner as possible. I've entitled my talk, Spiritualities in Dialogue, Ignatius of Loyola, Ruth Burrows, and Ourselves. Loyola and Burrows are the most influential spiritual mentors of my life. I want to put them in dialogue with one another in order to make known the markers of two very different spiritualities, then to speak of my own spirituality, influenced as it is by the two of them, and from this to draw out what I hope will be some markers by which you can better identify your own spirituality. Before entering into the key religious experiences of Burrows and Loyola, it might be good to give you my definition of spirituality. After 5 years of graduate studies, I came up with a 5-word definition. I think of it as nearly copyrighted. Here it is. It's meant to apply to any person's spirituality within or outside any tradition. I define spirituality as, quote, one's lived relationship to mystery. There is a capital M on mystery. Let me unpack it. One's. Every person has a spirituality, whether they know it or not, and it is uniquely their own, as long as they are open to the mystery of life. It's as specific to them as life is experienced, as differentiated among us. Lived relationship. One's spirituality is not a concept, a statement, a system, an abstract position, but the taking of an existential lived felt stance toward mystery. It might be awe, fear, wonder, thankfulness, dependence, humility, zeal, elan, timidity, hopefulness, passion. But these are only rough approximations in words of what the actual lived relationship existentially might be. And finally, mystery. At times, the sameness of life, its surface day-to-day experienced reality, breaks open in capital M mystery. Life is suddenly broken open and experienced with a depth, an horizon, and otherness in experience, such as joy, love, beauty, call, loss, grief, wonder, oneness with nature, awareness of death, finitude, inner exaltation. When we experience these unexpected capital M mysteries of life, these experiences of life as more than usual, we have to take a stance toward them, a lived relationship toward them in an existential manner. This, one's lived relationship to mystery, is what a spirituality is. They can fall within and be shaped by broader categories such that they can be called Christian or Jewish or Muslim, Hindu, Buddhist, feminist, ecological, spirituality of justice, of nature, Ignatian or Carmelite spirituality. But in their lived reality and how they are lived by persons in actuality, they are unique. No one has the same spirituality as another. Each has their own spirituality. Ignatius, Ruth, Steve, and you each have a spirituality, and it has certain markers or indicators. Both Ignatius of Loyola and Ruth Burrows would be the first to be puzzled and even perhaps to disown anything called Ignatian spirituality or the spirituality of Ruth Burrows. They would see it simply as their way of living Christian faith with a few insights, hard-earned from their experience, about that Christian faith and commitment. Yet there is a spirituality as lived by the person of Ignatius of Loyola, and a spirituality as lived by the person Ruth Burrows. What we are interested in finding this afternoon are the markers of their lived spirituality so that we can look for those common markers in our own lives. Let's begin with Ignatius, for we know him better, and then be introduced to Ruth Burrows. The first marker of Ignatius' spirituality is his childhood or youth. It's one of dreams, fantasies, urgent longings to win renown, to be a courtier, a valiant, dashing, courageous troubadour, serving royalty, winning fame, and winning the hand of a princess. These early primordial strivings of his spirit mark his spirituality forever. The second marker is an almost unknown sensitivity or perception of inner movements of the soul, as revealed in what has been called his conversion and in hundreds of other places in his life. Ignatius probably did not even know that he had this unusual capacity. It underlay the turning point, the revelations at the Cardinere, and his jottings about interior movements that became the spiritual exercises. The third marker and the culmination of the shaping of his spirituality was an almost literal conforming himself to Jesus as made known in the Gospels, a drive to be brought closer to Jesus as a companion by the use of a powerful imagination, fueled by those youthful fantasies applied to the particularities of Jesus' life, and that urgent longing fulfilled in the experience of Listorta, of being placed with the Son. This was not only a turning point in the road, which is what Listorta means, but an irrevocable turning forever with Jesus toward the Father in service of others. A fourth marker of his spirituality was to win companions and in tight comradeship with them, to place himself and them at the service of the universal church, doing whatever what was needed to make this service what was most lacking and most needed in his time. We cannot envision Ignatius in his lived spirituality without companions. He sought them again and again. A final fifth marker of his spirituality is what I will call his life symbol, running throughout and forming all of the other markers of his spirituality and best capturing its uniqueness. His life symbol was to be a knight in the service of a great and magnanimous king who undertakes his worldwide campaign for good and invites the knight to join with other companions in the campaign of the king, assured that as he shares in the battle and the suffering with the king, he will also share in the glory. This is a powerful, dynamic life symbol, one that captures the whole of Ignatius, gives power to the whole of his life, and underlies who he was and what he did. His was thoroughly a spirituality of service. This life symbol is the closest we will come to putting in words his spirituality as one's lived relationship to mystery. Without the animation of the life symbol, we would never have heard of Ignatius of Loyola or have sought to animate a university with what we call Ignatian spirituality. 5 markers that identify one person's spirituality. Let's now see the markers of another person and then see if we can trace our own. Ruth Burrows calls for a bit more introduction than did Ignatius. Ruth Burrows is the pen name, actually, of an English Carmelite nun named Sister Rachel Gregory. She chose the pen name in her first book, her autobiography, Before the Living God, because of some critical comments she needed to make about certain persons in Carmelite leadership, but whom she didn't want to offend. She kept the name for her dozen subsequent books on mysticism, Christian faith, prayer, the 3 great Carmelite saints, Teresa of Avila, John of the Cross, and Thérèse of Lisieux, and the Carmelite way of life. I wrote a doctoral dissertation on her life, knew her personally very well, and was privileged to be asked to write her obituary for the tablet after she died last fall at the age of 100. She's listed in Bernard McGinn's book, Modern Mystics, an Introduction, as a modern mystic, along with such persons as Pierre Teilhard de Chardin, Dag Hammarskjöld, Simone Weil, Thomas Merton, Karl Rahner, Eddie Hillesum, Teresa of Avila, Teresa of Calcutta, and others. What were the markers of her spirituality? Like Ignatius, her childhood was determinative. This is her first marker. From her earliest years, she experienced an existential dread that at any moment the thread from which she hung in existence could snap and she would cease to be. Reared in a devout and loving large family, she never was able to have the simple religious experiences which other children seem to have of feeling loved by God or taking joy in devotions. No religious impressions or feelings got through to her, and this was true for the whole of her life. Instead, like Ignatius, she lived in her childhood from fantasies. Hers were of a great and wondrous lover, larger than life, who would sweep her up in his embrace and take her to his castle where there would be flowers and unbounded joy. She later believed these fantasies were her only way as a child of hiddenly seeking God, as well because of being blocked. The second marker was a brilliance, an innate understanding of other persons, a keen intelligence and natural ascendancy, a psychological insight like that of Teresa of Avila. At the age of 17, she was accepted to go to Oxford and dreamed of its lofty spires, which fit her fantasies of the lover and the castle. But then something happened that is the third marker of her spirituality. On a high school retreat of her girls' school, she makes herself a busybody, passing notes, whispering, disrupting others. The priest giving the retreat simply asks her if there is something she is trying to avoid facing by these antics. In that moment, she realized she was afraid to be good, afraid of what it might ask of her, seeing that it was so limitless, and she was given, just for a moment, an absolute assurance that God existed and that intimacy with God was possible. She still had no feelings, but she claims that her very being was turned toward her God, and there was no unmaking that orientation to God, for to unmake it would have been to unmake her. She saw that the only purpose of her life, since intimacy with God was possible, was to give over her life in pursuit of God in the most absolute way possible. There was no alternative. She turned down Oxford and entered a Carmelite monastery at the age of 18 to live within Carmel for the rest of her long life. The fourth marker of her spirituality was an extraordinary strength of leadership and a very practical governance. For 27 years, she was the prioress of her monastery, rethought the regulations devised by the foundress, Teresa of Avila, peeling away what belonged only to Teresa's time, revealing the truth for our day that lay beneath, and winning and forming dozens of young women attracted to this reality of a clear and thoughtful and closed contemplative life. As she once admitted to me, she saw herself in her forcefulness and thought as, quote, an eagle in a hen run. I had no hesitation to write in my obituary of her that she was a Teresa of Avila for our day. Finally, as a fifth marker of her spirituality, she too had a very definite life symbol that expresses better than anything else could what her spiritual life really was. She writes, often the image came to her of being alone in a boat without oar or sail in the midst of the ocean under a midnight sky, yet knowing there was in an unseen rock fortress underneath the surface of the water that supported her. I know from studying all of her writings and hundreds of conversations with her that this complex image, this life symbol, says more about Sister Rachel Gregory, really, how she felt, how life felt to her, what her lived relationship to mystery was, and how she was called to surrender darkly before God, yet hiddenly to know she was supported by Jesus Christ. Hers is a spirituality of trust. We've seen the outlines of two very different spiritualities of two significant Christian figures, Ignatius of Loyola and Ruth Burrows. For each of them, 5 markers, quite parallel with one another, give the outlines of their highly distinct spiritualities. We will trace in a moment whether similar markers help us to identify our own spiritualities. But first, let's see what happens when we put Loyola and Burrows in dialogue with one another. Interlude, an imagined dialogue. What if Ignatius and Ruth were to meet and enter into a dialogue about their spiritualities? How might it go? How might it bring out where they differ and where they agree? Let's listen in. She. Ignatius, you must be proud of how many people you have helped over 5 centuries with your spiritual exercises and your Ignatian spirituality. He. I'm not proud at all. I didn't create it. It was taught to me as to a schoolboy by God. And I hate that word you use in your day, spirituality. I like to think of it simply as a way of following Jesus. But I wonder if you, Sister Ruth, aren't proud that you've taken this way of following Jesus to a much deeper level in your day. She. I'm not proud either, although some like to kid me by calling me Truthy Ruthie. I could not do otherwise. This was all I could lean on, live from. Not my way, but God's. I think that's where we fundamentally agree, accepting God's way as shown in Jesus. By the way, I want to ask you if you really think there is a skill that can be taught to discern the movements of the Holy Spirit. Your followers seem to think so. I don't. I wouldn't call it a skill, more like a learned capacity to be attentive to the subtle ways of God's presence that is manifested in us. You see, I believe that God is laboring in the world, and especially in the wholeness of us, in our minds and wills and feelings and hearts and souls. My experience is that God is not hidden except to be sought, to be found, to be loved, to be served in all things. Don't you agree? She. No, I don't agree at all. I believe in naked faith and that we simply need to make our choices and be accountable for them without attributing them in any way to some supposed movements in us of God. Really, how do we know they are from God? Oh, there may be some people who may have special gift to discern the Holy Spirit, but that's rare, and it is certainly not a skill or a capacity, as so many of your followers imply it is. It's this aspect of your spirituality that I especially refer to when I say the Jesuits are reluctant to, quote, rip the veil off Ignatius, end quote. Please excuse me, Father, as I have, quote, ripped the veil off Teresa, end quote. Your way of following Jesus is rock solid, but there are certain aspects that must be seen as the vestigial remains of your living and guiding others in an era of Christendom when the sacred supposedly permeated everything. we've learned differently in our day. Now we're getting down to it. It comes down to the question, where is your God? You live in one place, like a mother of the desert, alone, believing in God, a stark place, even a barren place, stripping away supports which you fear might take the place of God, seeking God alone, the only God, relying on Jesus as the only way to him. I live on the road, going out into the world, to all places and peoples and situations, seeking God in all things and at times finding him laboring in the world. That's where my God is, and that, I think, is what makes the difference between us. Not who is God, but where is God, and how found. I wonder rather when you say God, whether you mean the same thing that I do. We can have what I would call a familiar sense of God as it were in quotation marks, the one we were, so to speak, comfortable with when we grew up, the one that we can relate to and believe that we experience. Or then there is God, with an exclamation point, the unutterable God beyond human knowing or experience, God in God's self, not familiar, not one we've grown up with, God who is beyond experience, attained only in faith, not found in all things, true God. Could this be what is behind our difference and behind the absolute necessity for both of us to know and to come to God only through Jesus? I'd like to wrap up this dialogue between us. My head is hurting. As you know, I like to use the imagination. As you were talking, I was thinking of an image that reconciles our differences and lets others in to find their place in the dialogue. The phrase came to me, a house divided against itself cannot stand. But what if our house is not divided, but we inhabit different parts of it? You seem to me to be in the basement, where it is dark, encased, solid, quiet, below ground, undisturbed. I'm up in the attic, where there is light and the treasures of the past, where at night I can see the stars and marvel at the universe through the skylight. There I find joy, inspiration, uplift. Maybe you in the basement find assurance, being apart, hidden but protected. What do you think of my image? Not bad, she says. That house of yours is an example of your trust in the imagination, though it makes me there in the basement a bit musty, and you up there in the attic a bit lightheaded. What I do like about your image is that what is between us, between the basement and the attic, are the living quarters. So there is plenty of room for everyone to live their faith journeys without trying to live ours, though we each have a truth that is needed, and others can go up or come down to consult us. Our basement and attic make the house whole. Thank you for the conversation. Thank you too. End of the interlude of an imagined dialogue. My spirituality. We've seen the markers of two spiritualities and have placed them in dialogue with one another in order to help us understand how to identify our own spiritualities in light of what we have seen so far. I thought it would be helpful to indicate, by way of example, how I identify my own spirituality. The first marker of my spirituality comes, as for them, from my youth. I like to say the two sacred shrines of my childhood in Juneau, Alaska, were the Catholic Church and the public library. I loved to spend time after leaving the parochial school to go into the church where it was empty and dark, mysterious, lit only by the sanctuary lamp. And then a couple of blocks further on the way home to stop in the public library, again quiet, lost for hours in a whole world of mystery until the priestly librarian came and helped me to find just the right book. My heart was reaching out. My favorite books were ones about dog sledding alone to the North Pole or sailing alone around the world. When I made a retreat as a teenager at Faulkner, Maryland, I only remember standing alone, looking out across the wide Potomac to the light of a lonely buoy beckoning. The vocation beneath my vocation was somehow a call to be alone with mystery. This shaped me and has stayed with me ever since. The second marker of my spirituality came through an experience I had when I was 27, already 9 years a Jesuit. To understand this, it is helpful to know that I was the prototypical good, obedient child. When my father wrote a family history, he introduced the section on me with, quote, "If we had one good, obedient child, it was Stephen. He was almost pitifully good. His mother and I believed that if we had told him to walk down the street into Gastineau Channel in Juneau, he would have done so." When I was 27 and making a retreat outside of Rome, the director, who happened to be a psychiatrist, found me to be too rigid, too good, too obedient, not myself. Over several sessions, he loosened me up, and finally I was free enough to shout out to him, "Well then, I don't know whether I want to be a Jesuit." After an hour suspended in this state of acute suffering and indecision, I heard, so to speak, from God, "Steve, you don't need to be a Jesuit. I don't care if you are a Jesuit or not. You choose what you want to be, and I will love and bless you in that." I chose to be a Jesuit. The turning point has profoundly affected my spirituality. It has reset it. The third marker that shaped my spirituality was the companionship of the Society of Jesus. This guy whose heart draws him to be alone in mystery with God in prayer or with art and poetry is equally shaped by a companionship he can count on and which he supports. I've always felt that our three vows as Jesuits of chastity, poverty, and obedience are for the sake of making possible another vow, which is a commitment to stand with one another as Jesuits for life. Ultimately, this marker of being shaped by the companionship is my angle of relationship with Jesus as companion. I seek in the Gospels to make real the historical Jesus, to find Jesus real, and to be in relationship with him as I am, companions, both of us. The fourth marker of my spirituality is something that I really can't account for, a kind of natural leadership, a living well with having authority, a personal gravitas. Perhaps this is my serious Swedish side. It's a steadiness, an interior calm, a reliability, a way of being that allows others to lean on me and to be reassured even in trying times. I picture myself as a big gray rock that others can come around and lean on. Not very inspiring, not colorful, not a butterfly, but a big gray rock. But that's not my life symbol. My life symbol, the fifth marker, is a river, not standing alongside and looking at one part of a river. Rather, it's the sense of the river as a simultaneous whole, in its origins in the snowfields above Juneau, Alaska, and at the same time in its flow into the ocean, and everything in between, rushing, clear, wide, muddy, flooding, irrigating, generating power, slowing, deepening. My sense of this life symbol is not that I once came from pure cold streams of life, but that I do right now. And not that I someday will flow into the ocean that is God, but that I already do, that I'm already there. My life symbol is of the river as a whole at one time, in all of its flowing life, all given, not past or merely promised. This symbol of the river says more about my spirituality than anything else could. Mine's a spirituality of reassurance. I'm sure you see in my spirituality some reflections of the aloneness in mystery and the trust of Burrows, and something of the companion service to Jesus of the gospel of Ignatius of Loyola. But I believe that one's spirituality is so peculiar to the individual, so fundamental, so influenced by the early set of our being, that others' spirituality less serve to determine ours and more serve as mirrors within which we gain a perspective in order to identify and understand our own spirituality and to enrich what is truly ours with their insights. I propose that seeing our spirituality in dialogue with others help us better to understand our own unique relationship to mystery. Let's turn, by way of conclusion, to how this understanding of spiritualities might help you to understand better your own spirituality. There are, of course, broad general traditions called Ignatian spirituality, Carmelite spirituality, ecological spirituality, and so forth. They have a set of characteristics, a structure, a set of practices, values, and insights. They inform us, attract us, guide us, and bring us into community with others who share in that tradition. But no one actually lives these spiritualities. What people live in reality is something much more particular, defined by who they are, personal, specific, though influenced by the wider categories or traditions. Although a Jesuit, I don't live Ignatian spirituality. I live my spirituality informed by the Ignatian tradition, and as you might have guessed, also insignificantly influenced by Ruth Burrows. We each have a spirituality that is our own. No one else has it. It is living that spirituality that makes us to be real before God so that God can touch and grace us as we really are. It is worthwhile to know better or to identify our own spirituality because this helps us to align with and to build on it. It has a power, a life which is irreplaceable. From our study of the markers of three personal spiritualities, what might be helpful markers to consider in knowing better our own spirituality? The first marker is to consider our childhood or youth in terms of our early fantasies, dreams, desires, natural to us reachings out. There's an early developed set of our being, a basic orientation, a feel of life, which is permanent and which will underlie all of our life. It's like the direction of the grain of the wood of which we are made. Becoming aware of this allows us, as it were, to plug our spirituality into the very source of our life, into the power of how life flows within us. The second marker, as it was for Ignatius, Ruth, and also for me, is what is the gift we have of knowing, relating, feeling, leading, expressing ourselves, relating, listening, appreciating beauty, or being present to oneself, or being energetic or quiet or imagining. We all are gifted. We are just gifted differently. Our gift will be caught up in our spirituality for our benefit and for the benefit of others. A third marker to consider in seeking to identify our own spirituality within the Christian tradition, though if we are of another tradition, an appropriate parallel could also be drawn, is to ask, what is our gospel? What event or teaching, what gospel emphasis or theology, what manifestation of Jesus brings us back and back? Where do we rest, settle, find ourselves at home in the gospel? We can ask ourselves, what is the gospel according to, and insert our name there. A fourth marker of our spirituality is found in a turning point in our lives, one that we did not bring about, but which we received. For Ignatius, this was being placed with the Son. For Burrows, it was the revelation that intimacy with God was possible. For me, it was God making known to me to choose my life as truly as I could, and He would bless it. It might be something very different: surviving a loss, falling in love, a tragedy, a big disruption, receiving an illumination or calling, a life-threatening disease, or becoming a parent, or being changed by the experience of the poor, finding oneself in a new place of life because of these turns, anything that resets our lives. The fifth and final marker to look for is what is one's life symbol? To what symbol do we find ourselves repeatedly being drawn? Something that seems to grasp the whole of us, more than thought or words could, something less that we grasp and more that grasps us, something like Ignatius's knight in the service of a king, Ruth's boat floating on the dark ocean, or my river at one time in its whole reality. A life symbol has the power to grasp the whole of us on all levels of ourselves: mind, heart, feeling, body, soul, faith, and the whole of life's experiences. Because of this power, a life symbol comes closest to enabling us to know and express one's lived relationship to mystery. After proposing a personal definition of individual spirituality as one's relationship to mystery, I have looked at more evident markers of three persons: Ignatius of Loyola, Ruth Burrows, and my own. The more evident markers of their spirituality were youthful fantasies, personal gift, Jesus of the gospel, graced turning point, companionship or leadership, and life symbol. The three personal examples of very different spiritualities in dialogue with one another suggested that similar markers might be fruitful dimensions for us to explore in order to identify or to know better our own personal spirituality. In the end, we must evaluate this understanding of our spirituality with humility. As persons, we remain a mystery to ourselves, so spirituality ultimately is itself a mystery. Mysteries are not to be understood, but are to be embraced and lived. This ineffable and indecipherable quality of one's spirituality is why anyone can be passionate to explore it, as I am, to speak about it, to sketch its outlines, to know it better, but what counts to accept it more deeply, more truly, more fully, and above all, more thankfully as a graced reality. Thank you very much.